Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network, distributed as a partner of Wondery and Amazon. We have 2 races remaining before we'll know our field of 16 that'll vie for the top prize in stock car racing. An interesting result last week at an Indy that shook up the playoff picture, and we're here to break it all down. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by racing analyst and professional NASCAR bettor Chris Wormy. And Wormser, McDriver goes out there in a race that stayed green largely from start to finish, took care of business, and punched his ticket to the postseason.
Yeah, what an impressive run out of this guy. I was actually looking, we had a little bit of on him, before the race started. And I thought, man, if he looks good, I'm going to pounce quickly. And then he took the lead like in 2 laps. I'm like, oh boy,
you had no opportunity to really be able to do that.
Gone. And, a great run, fantastic for that team. I'm happy for Michael McDowell. I think he's great for the sport. Listening to him on Denny Hamlin's Actions Detrimental was fascinating to just hear the differences from front row racing compared to someone like Joe Gibbs Racing or even 23XI, and in the differences in equipment and resources, and for that team to kind of overcome that, and how important it is to get teams into the playoffs and drivers competing for or teams competing for the owners championship and the money associated with that. I had no idea until I listened to that podcast. So happy for that 34 squad. He's been fast on road courses his entire career, and to finally get a win, I was happy for him.
Yeah, the economics of NASCAR, especially at the highest levels, are a little bit eye-popping when you figure out what it takes for some of these underfunded teams to put competitive race cars on the track each and every weekend. And encourage anybody that doesn't already make that part of their weekly NASCAR preparation to go back and listen to the interview Chris referenced between Denny Hamlin and Michael McDowell. Great episode of Actions Detrimental, as most of them are, to try and help raise the level of understanding for those of us that don't have access to how a Cup team operates, and especially one of the top flight drivers that's remained one of the true contenders to try and add that to his illustrious resume. For those folks new to the Stay Green podcast, we try and break things up around here. Stage 1, everything we learned the previous week and what we can apply going forward. Stage 2, we peel back the curtain a little bit on our NASCAR process. We'll see exactly where that takes us this weekend. And Stage 3, all about the upcoming race breakdown this weekend, which will take us to Watkins Glen, the Bowling 355, or whatever the hell they're calling it. Look, they're not sponsoring this podcast. It doesn't matter if we get the race right, as long as people aren't betting the wrong races when they go to their sports books. But Stage 1, Worm, we talked a little bit about Michael McDowell, obviously winning the race. Went off widely around 12-1. If you shopped, you could have found him at 16-1. More importantly, we say that as a sports bettor, if you've handicapped the races correctly, when a race stays green, the less chaos, the better for all parties involved. And we had 1 caution flag. The thing stayed green from pretty much lap 6 onwards, and it was allowed to complete itself in, 2 hours and 10 minutes, which is unheard of. You got an hour post-race show on NBC, which is something we haven't seen since they took over from Fox. And it wasn't just Michael McDowell grabbing headlines, but I'm always curious to get your take in terms of what the casual fan or even the bettors may have missed in terms of who you saw as some of the top cars in that race that were not able to grab the checkered flag.
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack about this race. I think that, when you look back at the last 4 races, the leader has kind of blown it on pit road, whether it was strategy or just a pit mistake or a penalty. You go back to Pocono and you had the strategy of Truex taking 4 tires and losing the lead to Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson, who took 2 tires and were able to beat him off pit road. Truex was not able to get past him. Then you go on to Richmond. You have Tyler Reddick missing pit entry and getting a penalty and giving away the lead to Chris Buescher. And then he does it again at Michigan when he beats Chris Buescher off, but they have a loose lug. And And then it happens again to Suarez, who is leading, goes on pit road for the final time, and he just never was able to recover. And it just goes to show you that these races are so hard to win, even with a fast car, that you have to put it together as a team completely. These races are really hard to win. And then to look at another driver that had an incredible day, and in my opinion, this is going to piss off a lot of Chase Elliott fans, had a faster car than Chase Elliott. I thought that the fastest car, you could argue, Daniel Suarez and Michael McDowell. I'd give an edge to anyone with a good explanation. But I think the next best car was Ty Gibbs. He was spun on laps, 5, and then they went green. Or no, he was spun on lap 6 when they went green, and then they stayed green the entire time. So he kind of gets her going in like 25th or whatever. And then with a cautionless race, almost drives back to the top 10. Unfortunately, we didn't hit our top 10 bet, but he was the only guy passing cars left and right. And he was passing fast cars later in the run and was running really good lap times. I expect him to be good this week too.
Look, I mean, William Byron did something similar, and you talk about how it takes a team effort from the moment you unload. Well, William Byron had a pass-through penalty. Now, granted, the caution flag came at the perfect time for him, so he didn't lose a lot of separation from the field. But when you start at the tail end, no matter how fast your car is, Byron racing from 39th up to 14th spoke volumes, but was never really in the equation as far as figuring out who the race winner was going to be. And as far as other drivers, I mean, I know we faded Brody Kostecki. Unfortunately, couldn't give that out to some of the Stay Green listeners. And it's not to pat ourselves on the back by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we miscalculated what the 33 car was going to
100%.
do, given how little he was actually able to practice, given some of the issues. And maybe we can't sell short the supercar drivers that are coming over from Australia and New Zealand, because SVG didn't look good in practice, still kept his car inside the top 10. And while he set the bar extremely high for himself with the win on the Chicago street course, him and Brody were outstanding, in my opinion, a far cry from some of the gentler driving that we've seen from F1 drivers where Kamui and Jenson Button, I mean, they look like they were out for a Sunday cruise.
I think it's important to have a bumper on your car. Like, apparently that translates well to stock car racing. And especially on these road courses where it's hard to make passes, you have to take a chance. You have to outbrake someone. You have to get inside of them. And when that happens, man, you're going to be beating and banging. And those both Kostecki and SVG, I thought, had solid runs, especially after their practice and qualifying. They looked terrible, and they were still able to get decent finishes. And fortunately, we were able to escape with those fades, but man, it was not like we weren't on the right side of those at all throughout the race, maybe early on in the race, but the latter part, we needed a little bit of luck, and that happens. And to sit here and tell everyone that listens to this podcast that we are right every time would just be a lie. We got it wrong, and we got some breaks to fall our way, and we're going to take it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, in this business, regardless of what sport you're betting, you can't apologize for winners, but you have to be cognizant of where Lady Luck was on your side so you don't make the same mistakes multiple times going forward. And you know what? We said things were going to be brief in honor of the Indy race that stayed green and got done in record time. We're waving the green, white checkered flag on stage 1 around these parts and moving right on to stage 2. But before we do so, encourage all of you to follow Chris on X. And I guess I have to start calling it X instead of Twitter at this point, that it's going to stick. At Chris Wormy 15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. And for all things Bet the Board, you can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. That encompasses all of our great football coverage, both the NFL and college. Stay green information relevant there as well. And like I have said a number of times, we have a Bet the Board newsletter that goes out weekly to remind you of any of the great content that you may have missed throughout the course of a busy work week. In stage 2, Worm, we normally come in with a game plan. We've thrown about some ideas that we want to talk about and help, unpeel the onion or take a bite out of the apple, whatever the hell we want to use. Well, onions have layers. Onions have layers. Okay. And so while you sit here and roll your eyes, they do have layers. So that was somewhat thought out, in honor of the first playoff race in the Truck Series for good old Todd Bodine and the onion out there. We'll call this, we'll call this dealer's choice, because I'm not sure where you're going to take it. But I'm sure whatever you say, it'll be something dumb and that I can unpack.
I'm not going to say unpeel the onion.
Fire away. It's stage 2, baby. Where do you want to go, Worms?
Okay, well, I just want to talk about...
The world is your oyster.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's shuck this oyster, okay?
Here we go.
We got 2 races, Watkins Glen and Daytona, before we head into the playoffs. And if you look back, let's go all the way back to, you have to go back to May to a race that I think actually would translate to the playoffs. If you look at the way that the playoffs are setting up, I think you'd say, oh my gosh, it's Truex. He's had the most speed. Then you look at a guy like Denny Hamlin, has had a ton of speed. Those guys have to be the favorites moving into the playoffs. And then there's guys lurking like a William Byron with multiple wins, and then Kyle Larson, who just has speed all the time. But as of late, Byron and Larson have been nowhere to be found. And I had an interesting conversation the other day with someone who's like, there's a chance that Hendrick could be testing things. And I went back and took a look, and Charlotte, like it was back in May, the 600-mile race, and we do visit that in the playoffs, but it's the Roval. It's not the 1.5-mile track that they race the Coke 600 on. But then we went to Gateway, which really doesn't translate to anything, maybe Phoenix, but that's the last race of the year. I don't know that people are going to be taking a lot of notes from that. Sonoma has no relevance. Nashville has no relevance. Chicago has no relevance. Atlanta has no relevance. Loudon, I guess, kind of back to that Phoenix, but it doesn't translate. You kind of have to throw all of that away when it comes down to that final race. Pocono has no relevance. Richmond has no relevance. Michigan has no relevance. Indy GP, no relevance.
I'm catching a common trend here that's starting to emerge.
These don't matter. You look at these races that matter. You have Darlington. That was way back when. Who was good there? That was Truex, Chastain, Larson were really good there. I think that Byron just kind of happenstance, right place, right time, was able to get that win. You go to Kansas, it was Denny and it was Larson. And then you get to Bristol. We haven't even seen what a concrete Bristol track. We've seen dirt. So then you go to Texas. We haven't even run at Texas this year. And last year it was a big question mark with the tires. Then you head to Talladega, pick a card, any card. That guy could win. Then you go into the Roval. Then you go into the Roval, then Vegas, Homestead, Martinsville. So I think that I know you want to have momentum going into the playoffs when you feel confident in your speed, but I think that there may be some teams that aren't showing their hand because they just haven't had to. They've been locked into the playoffs this entire year. Let's see what we can learn about this car. It's only been, 18 months since we've actually been driving this thing throughout all these tracks. And I think that there's some teams, or I'm hoping that there's some teams that are going to kind of come out of the mix. And I think one of those, a couple of those drivers will come out of the Hendrick camp. And if we somehow get a Bowman win, here in these next couple races, I think that he could also be competitive in the playoffs as well.
Well, and the reason I actually think your hypothesis holds weight is we can look at the case study, and albeit it's a limited sample size, but we don't have much to go off of from the next-gen car. For the 24 William Byron last year and what happened. If you go back through William Byron, he wins the race at Martinsville, finished third the week before at Richmond. I know the schedule is a little jumbled up there. He then goes the next 18 races and has one top 10 finish where he finishes 9th on the road course at Sonoma. He finishes 34th at Daytona, the final regular season race. And then suddenly they get into the playoffs and HMS goes 8 for the 24 at Darlington. He finishes 6th at Kansas. He finishes 3rd at Bristol. He finishes 7th at Texas. And while I know the 24 didn't ultimately win the championship, it speaks to the fact that there may have been a lot of tinkering going on, not necessarily with all of their race teams here, but look, the 24 and 5 we know are in. They've shown speed when they've needed it. It's not as simple as just waving the magic wand and thinking those guys are going to be fine. But would it shock anybody if HMS was putting all of their resources into the 9 and into the 48 to try and get them into the playoffs? Because we mentioned Denny at the top of the show, and something that I didn't quite understand because it doesn't factor in when we're handicapping races. The Owners' Championship is different than the Drivers' Championship. And the 9, they're into the Owners' Championship as things stand right now. Chase Elliott just has to win to get himself in because of all the races he missed. The 48, I think, has a lot more work to do and has to win a race to get in. But it's a very different dynamic in play for those two drivers. And to say that the 9 and the 48 couldn't win in each of the subsequent weeks, regardless of how it worked out, whether it's the 48 is a little bit of a long shot this weekend at Watkins Glen, and Chase Elliott having a spacer that allows him to go 17 miles an hour faster than the rest of the field at Daytona is really possible. So we talk all the time in sports about recency bias and how the betting market responds to what it saw last. Keep that in mind, not necessarily this weekend for Watkins Glen, but when we hit the fast forward button, all bets are off when we start the playoffs Labor Day weekend at Darlington in terms of how some of these drivers are going to be priced and the things that we're going to want to look for in the head-to-head matchups out there. And part of the reason I say that is because I know some of the buzz that's already building around Chase Elliott being able to replicate the speed that we saw last weekend. But saying Chase is going to win is one thing. When you factor in the price, and we'll get to Chase Elliott as one of the prohibitive favorites this weekend at Watkins Glen, I'm not sure that a rational individual can pre-week him at the numbers currently being offered in the market. But we said stage 2 is going to be brief, and so I appreciate the good old Chris Wormy rant.
Yep.
So we're going to wave the green-white checkered flag here, and much like Watkins Glen, it's 20 laps for stage 1, 20 laps for stage 2, and the lion's share of heavy lifting for stage 3 that we'll head into right now. When we head to upstate New York, just south of Seneca Lake, Watkins Glen was a course that opened up in 1956, and when you look at the iterations it's gone through, a little bit of a unique situation. Started hosting auto races that were previously held on public roads in and around the village. Encourage anybody that doesn't know the history of Watkins Glen to go back and look. I mean, this was a 6-mile course that they raced on asphalt, dirt, concrete, and honestly, NASCAR wants to do everything else. I'd love to see a road course where we run multi-surfaces. We hear them complain all the time about, car doesn't handle the same way at Pocono in turn 1 as it does.
They should turn sprinklers on in one corner, like the wet corner.
Tell me how your car is going to handle when you go from asphalt to concrete to dirt. Yeah. And you're able to make sure that the setup is fitting for all of that. And to your point, we could add a little bit of wetness to the track as well, so you can figure out if wet tires are going to be able to get it done. Watkins Glen has hosted a cup race every year since 1986, COVID the lone exception. This, of course, is a high-speed road course, less technical than some of the tracks that we've seen already this season. 2.5 miles, 2.45 if you want to get technical. Track type technically classifies as multi-elevational road course. Number of turns, 7, depending on how you count them. You mentioned the race length, 220.5 miles. You wonder why the track gets its Go Bowling 355. That's kilometers for all you Canadian friends and everywhere else throughout the world that are paying attention to it. And if you're looking for a drinking game this weekend, Worm, I'm going to leave it to you. Should you drink every time you hear the word S's, or should you drink every time you hear the word bus stop?
Yeah,
to make sure that you don't get absolutely blacked out before you even get to stage 3.
I think, although I think that the S's are more important to the car, I still think the bus stop game, you'd be pretty drunk, I would imagine.
All right, well, you can have all of the dry Canadian seltzers that you polish off on the pre-race pull on Sunday, and make sure you can do your sipping as needed through the Xfinity race, through the Cup race. And the same question we let off Indy Road course with last week, I'm going to ask you the same thing here. What do we look to use from a comparison standpoint? But before we get there, I want to lay out a little bit of track history in addition to some of the specs. Chevrolet has won the last 4 times we've come to Watkins Glen, but just 1 for 4 on road tracks this season. Chevy has won 16 of 21 road courses, but not the same level of dominance in the next-gen car. When we look at HMS, they've won the last 4 races at Watkins Glen, been dominated by the 5 and 9. Joe Gibbs Racing and HMS have combined to win each of the last 6 Watkins Glen races, as well as 7 of the last 9 with 5 different drivers. But comparisons, standalone, technical, high speed, what kind of things are you factoring in to building a race car this weekend?
I'm just kind of looking at the Watkins Glen history. I think that this is such a different track. Just the speed in general, you have to make sure you have speed in your race car. Handling obviously going to be important, but it's just a completely different car and setup from the weeks before or previous road course races. So this is truly a standalone. That's why I think it's so great. We're going to see who unloads fast, and obviously there are drivers with great histories here that you're obviously going to have to monitor their price. But for the most part, I think that you could see someone catch a setup and hopefully at higher odds, and we can get paid out on it. It's just such a standalone race, in my opinion.
Hey, that's a fair way to look at it. And, when you look at some of the numbers, we've already seen some movement. We'll talk about the drivers that we've seen, move quite a bit throughout the betting markets. Obviously, a couple shops open significantly higher and some other drivers a little bit lower. But we may as well start with NASCAR's most popular driver. But I kind of joked on social media with a NASCAR fan worm that, you know what? Chase Elliott might be popular, but he's no Dale Jr. Because if he was Dale Jr., we would have seen a debris caution last weekend at Indy with about 5 laps to go to at least give the 9 a restart chance to knock the 34 out of the way. Chase Elliott's price, though, I've seen as low as plus 275 at a prominent book. We'll call a consensus 3.5 to 1. And when we look at the 9 car, 29 straight races without a win since Talladega last year. He's 19th in the point standings. We know he has to win to get in. Coming into this weekend off that second place finish at Indy. That was actually the first finish inside the top 10 in his last 5 races. He's led only 8 laps on road courses, though, all season, and just 39 laps for the year. That, of course, does come with the caveat that he hasn't been healthy all the time. And when we look at how he's performed at Watkins Glen, competitive, but we only have one data point as far as the next gen car is concerned. And he finished fourth here last year.
Well, I mean, he's priced as such that we should be betting him for the championship. Like it's a foregone conclusion. Like they still have to go out there and race on Sunday, and to see someone go off at less than 3-1 in some places is crazy for a car that hasn't gone out there and led that many laps this year. You got to remember when he's been here in the past, and he is very good at Watkins Glen. But last year he had 4 wins coming into this race, so he had been out front and had speed in his race car. This is a fast track, and I'm not saying that he's a fade guy. I just had a conversation with someone. It's okay to just have nothing on or against him just based on price. I'm not rushing to fade the guy, and I'm not rushing to bet on him. And to be honest, if he looks average in practice, he's going to be good. He looked average last week, and he was pretty damn good. So I'm just probably staying away from Chase Elliott altogether, unless I see something out of there, or we see maybe he pops at 5 or 6 to 1, and I feel like he has like a 3.5 to 1 car. But at this point, I don't think there's any reason to get involved with Chase Elliott. If you like him, maybe take him in a matchup. I wouldn't take him outright.
Kyle Larson, his teammate, has won here each of the last 2 trips. And when you look at the 5, I know all the talk has been about Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, but quietly the 5 is showing a lot more consistency than he was in the middle of the season. 7 top 8 finishes over his last 10 races. And as far as his track history is concerned, I mean, he has 7 straight starts here inside the top 6, hopes to become just the 3rd driver ever to win 3 in a row at Watkins Glen. Jeff Gordon was the last driver to accomplish the feat here back in 1997 to 99. Last 4 Watkins Glen finishes for, Kyle Larson, when you consider it 6th, 8th, and we mentioned first, back to back. He's also finished 14th, 8th, 4th, and 8th, respectively, on road courses in 2023. How do you look at the 5, who's priced throughout the market anywhere from 6 to 1 on the low end, upwards of 7 to 1?
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 outings here, obviously victories, so very comfortable at this road course, albeit last year a little bit of a greasy one, kind of punting his teammate in turn 1.
Look, sometimes you got to do things to be dirty out there.
Yeah,
to get that
I know.
dub.
And it's crazy because Larson just doesn't race that way. Like he only does it to his teammate, right? Like, but fortunately his teammate had 4 wins, so wasn't that big a deal for Chase. Obviously, just kind of taking a win from him. The one thing about Larson this year is we haven't seen speed out of him in road courses where we have typically in the past. The last couple of years when he's won at Watkins Glen, he's been the best car at Sonoma. He was pedestrian at Sonoma this year, and pretty much all the other road courses, he's kind of just been a very safe 5th to 12th place car. And typically we don't see that out of him. So if anything, I would say he's a little overvalued at this 6 to 1 price. If these guys unload and show speed, I think there's a good chance that we see, Chase run first and Kyle Larson run second. I just don't know that Kyle Larson is going to have the best car. I feel like if you like Larson, you have to like Chase. Like, I feel like when you texted me earlier this week, you said, "Hey, what do we think about Kyle Larson this week?" I go, "I think he finishes 1 spot behind Chase Elliott." And that might be 3-4, that might be 5-6, but that's what I think is going to happen.
Hey, look, I mean, if there's a chance for a greasy win late, I'm pretty sure the 5 isn't going to do what he needs to move the 9 out of the way. Otherwise, that team meeting Monday morning with Mr. H will not be the most pleasant experience for him. So I can definitely see that being the case. And when we look at the other favorite here, the only other driver that's widely available at a price less than 10 to 1, although he's been on the drift a little bit, I've seen some shops in that 6 to 1 range shop around, though 15 to 2s are out there, would be the leader right now in the regular season championship, Martin Truex Jr. Last 5 races, his average finish is 4th. He's got 5 straight top 7 finishes, just 4 finishes outside the top 11 over the last 18 races. He has been the model of consistency in the gold standard. Oh, how much difference a few months makes when we were talking about what was going on. Was the 19 going to retire? Could he regain his form? He's answered all of those questions and then some. 14 top 10 finishes so far this season, which means 58% of his races has resulted in a top 10 finish. That's actually the best among the series and explains why he's running away with that regular season title. When you look at a little bit of track history at Watkins Glen, 5 straight top 7 finishes here came to an end last season when he came home outside the top 20th. We've said that last year was not indicative for the Toyotas. They were all a little bit off the pace. But what's interesting about it is when Martin Truex Jr. has run well here, he has typically qualified well. When you're looking at the 19 this week amongst the favorites, buying or selling MTJ?
MTJ is a tough one. And we were talking kind of before the show, he drifting up to 7.5, 8. Like, what's the buy price? Eventually there is one. I mean, the car's been fast. Here's the other thing about Truex is he's practiced well every week, but sometimes he unloads like the fastest car I've ever seen, like he did at Michigan. Or sometimes he unloads like he did last week, where it looked like he was fast, felt comfortable with his car, and then just kind of ran 7th and was never a threat to be fast or at least kind of vie for the lead at all. If he gets up to like that 8.5 range, I could see pulling the trigger if it happens before Saturday's practice and qualifying. But he's tough. Truex is a tough read, I think, because he looks kind of the same in practice, and sometimes he's got a rocket, and other times he's just, I guess, I don't want to say blah because he's running in the top 10, but there's if Gibbs unloads fast, he's going to be fast. I just can't imagine that, and it'll be interesting to see the manufacturers how they unload, whether it's going to be Toyota, Ford, or Chevy, because that brings some higher odds guys into play. If all of a sudden Toyota looks good, obviously Truex will look good, but so will some other guys, and Denny Hamlin and Ty Gibbs. So. Or Tyler Reddick for that matter. So it'll be interesting to see how they unload. Truex is just a tough one to put your finger on, or at least tough one for me.
Well, as we continue down the board, I mean, you mentioned another Toyota driver. That would be Tyler Reddick, and his price, right around 10-1. You can shop around again, like always. I feel like a broken record here. I have seen some 12 out there. As far as the 45 car of 23XI, at current form, 3 top 6 finishes over his last 5 weeks. And if not for pit road, he'd have 4 and maybe have 37 wins already this season. It's the one question we always ask with Tyler Reddick. Can they go out there and execute? Because the speed is there. He's tied for the 3rd most points with 103 and 3rd most laps led of 41 on road courses so far in the 2023 season. But you look, it's kind of been feast or famine. He did finish here 7th last year at Watkins Glen. But what I found interesting, and I joked about the extended post-race coverage that we got Sunday after Indy, they asked Tyler Reddick and about how he viewed Watkins Glen, if he was able to bring a fast car, and said, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, that there are other drivers in the Cup Series that have a lot more experience, and it's not his favorite road course. Immediately raises a red flag for me for a course that's not as technical, that places a significant emphasis on being able to operate at brutally fast speeds.
Yeah, I think he said he's lost or something. I mean, it's really hard to go back a guy that says the week before, oh, I'm lost at this track. I mean, listen, I think he'll be good. I think he's going to qualify decent, but maybe find a top 10 price. Well, you probably won't be able to find that. Those top 10 markets this week are tough. With the exception of one driver.
Just make everybody minus $3 and then everybody else
and just
4 to
don't
1,
offer an against price. Yeah, it's just steal from people. But I don't know. I would look to him towards matchups maybe, but not the outright price. Especially like I just can't look. I can't imagine betting on someone after them saying like, "Oh, I don't like it here." And that's kind of for all people. If a golfer going to a golf course says like, I just don't play well here, I don't think I'm going to do well. Like, it's really hard for me to, no, I think you will. It's like, well, I'm the person. It's really hard for me to back that. So for that reason, I'm going to stay away at this point. But if all of a sudden he says he has an incredible car and we get him at 6-1, well, that's what we were hoping to get him at last week. And we were able to pull the trigger a little bit there. So I'm okay betting. I'm okay having his price drop a little bit and backing him if he comes out and says, well, this is a new Watkins Glen for me. I actually feel really comfortable and my car's good and I think I have race winning speed. Then I'll go ahead and back him.
Yeah, if an athlete tells you who he's going to be, you should probably listen more often than not when it comes to it. Unless, of course, it's Brad Keselowski. When asked about his car, will tell you he always has top 10 speed, at least for the most part.
Carl
or
Edwards
did when he was a member
guy.
of Team Penske. Oh, Carl
Edwards had the best car every week.
Carl Edwards was the absolute worst.
Oh, man.
He had that Subway 99 tuned up, and it didn't matter if he was going to finish top 3 or outside the top 20. That thing was a race-winning machine.
I'm so happy with my car this week. This Subway 99 car. Thanks to everybody at Subway. Roush Yates. I'm so happy. We're a great car today. It's like, I think you're going to run 20th, Carl. But he didn't care. He just said that every time.
Carl didn't want bad news. And this driver may not want bad news either because he has the slimmest of margins to try and get into the playoffs. Daniel Suarez, 12-1 this week. You mentioned him maybe having the best car last weekend in Indy, was done in on pit road, so we didn't have a chance to see him race for the win. 28 points below the cut line. He did lead the field in green flag speed last weekend. 3 top 6 finishes over his last 6 races, including that podium finish a week ago. His road course run last week, more indicative of what we've grown accustomed to from the 99.
Yeah.
And last year in the next gen car, came home 5th at the Glen, has 3 top 5 finishes here in 5 starts. I almost feel like this guy is getting slept on a little bit. Was hoping that the odds makers would give us a 15, 18 to 1 this week.
Yeah.
They clearly caught on. What do you make of Daniel Suarez in terms of his pre-week price?
Well, it's Trackhouse isn't making it a secret of where they're putting their resources. I mean, the 99 is running fast week in and week out, and the 1
they're putting it into they're putting it into the 91 instead of the 1.
I saw a post. I don't know if you follow a tweet or an X or whatever of a Ross Chastain missing on a milk carton. I mean, this guy's been non-existent. And to see the 99, it's not like Suarez has all of a sudden found a bunch of talent. I think that this is a team that's saying, hey, we're putting resources to getting this guy into the playoffs. And when you listen to Hamlin's podcast, you realize how important it is to get to that point. It makes sense for them to use resources because it could pay dividends in the future. And right now, Daniel Suarez is fast. Like I hate the 12 to 1 price because I think if we do get a 16 to 1, I think we probably would pull the trigger there. But unless he pulls it, I don't see his odds dropping too much. And after last week, I trust him even more as a driver, even if like an 8 or 9 to 1. He was really fast. But you still have to put together the whole race. I think that if they can unload, you're going to have to probably unload and qualify pretty well. If they can do that and they show some longevity on lap times, I'd be willing to pull the trigger on him at like an 8 or 9 to 1 based on his performance from last week. He just proved that he could go out there and run fast laps and lead laps. I'm not saying that he didn't do that when he won at Sonoma, but I'm pretty sure Kyle Larson had a tire fall off. Chase had like a speeding penalty. And by the way, if the 4 car doesn't have a slow pit stop, he probably wins that race too. So a lot went right for Suarez to win that race, whereas I think he was genuinely the fastest car last week. And if any of that speed can kind of transfer over, he could potentially find victory lane.
The old 8 machine of Kyle Busch, 14 to 1. If you look around throughout the marketplace, current form been an absolute dumpster fire. When you look at how he's performed over the last 5 races, not good, Bob. Not good at all. 36 last weekend at Indy, 37th at Michigan. He does have a 3rd place finish at Richmond, 21st at Pocono, and 36th at New Hampshire. Of course, last weekend he was significantly faster than where he finished, largely running inside the top 10 before things went a little bit haywire there. And when you look at how he's done at road courses so far this season, we can throw in the Chicago street course because it's second, and 5th. 36, the outlier, and he has been the model of consistency with 5 top 7 results in his last 7 races at Watkins Glen. The 8 car, buying or selling Kyle Busch to put together a complete race, and he's racing on Saturday as well.
It's a slight buy here. I like Kyle Busch this week. I think that this is his best road course, and he was obviously when he was with the Joe Gibbs Racing and that 18 M&M's car was always fast at this track, and I think that last year Reddick showed a little bit of speed in this 8 team. And if any of that transfers over, I think Kyle will have a really solid run. Now, is he going to go out there and win the race? I'm not quite sure of that, but I do trust him in like a top 5 market or certainly in matchups because this guy gets it done here. He's also proven that you can pass. There's been multiple times that Kyle Busch loved to go to the rear here and then drive back through the field. And so if there's anyone that I trust to make passes or that someone that makes a mistake, as long as they don't have any engine issues or like any terminal issues, I still think he can get back through the field as good as anybody. But the dumpster fire is real, and it's not because like there's 1/3 and then 36, 37, 21st, 36. Look, that's some bad mojo you got going. So maybe hold off on that 14 to 1, but that's a tough one. That's right at my buy line. Like,
hey, look, I mean, there's still time as we record here on Wednesday night for his price to drift out a little bit further. And so you're going to want to keep tabs on the market. No reason to run and jump in, double fisting Kyle Busch there as far at the betting window, but to try and wait and see if there's a little better price that'll pop. From Kyle Busch to last weekend's winner, Mick Driver, Michael McDowell, driver of the 34 car for Front Row Motorsports. 6 here last year. Can he win back-to-back races? There's nobody in the Cup Series that's accumulated as many points on the road course this year as Michael McDowell. has had 4 top 6s and 6 road course races run last season, including, like we said, 6 at Watkins Glen. But is this enough to get you to nibble at 14-1 on McDowell, knowing that he's going to have to show speed and not quite the same technical prowess to get it done this weekend like it took at Indy?
There's been some comments that this is his best road course. Okay, maybe, but I think that faster cars still have an advantage here. I know that seems super obvious, but I think just having speed in your race car, not the fastest car on the stopwatch, like obviously the fastest car has the best chance at winning a race. I'm just saying you just need speed in your race car on ovals, and like Pocono is just a great example, or Michigan's a great example of just having speed in your race car. You have a lot of on throttle time. That, I'm not saying it's a direct correlation, but it kind of shows the speed that these teams have. And do I think Michael McDowell can win this race? Absolutely. 14-1 isn't a terrible price, but I mean, like I said, I've been betting Michael McDowell for a long time in both the Xfinity Series when he was in great equipment and now the Cup Series at road courses. And he's only won 2 of them, one in the Cup Series and one in the Xfinity Series. I think that the recency bias probably has him, a little overvalued, but I do like him in other markets. If you find a decent price on a top 10 or a top 5, I certainly think he'll be around there. I trust him in matchups, but an outright price at 14-1, probably selling until we see practice and qualifying.
Christopher Bell, the driver that has been your kryptonite all season long. I heard you give him out on the pre-race poll. I told you, don't force me to bet this guy again. And lo and behold, I lit my money on fire on race day. Thankfully, I haven't backed him in matchups or any of the derivative markets. When we look at Christopher Bell, it's a good time to remind all of our loyal listeners, the last time Christopher Bell finished inside the top 5 was when he won on the Bristol Dirt back on Easter Sunday. Did finish inside the top 10 at Indy, so things are progressing nicely for him with a 9th place finish there. Only scored the 13th most points on road courses this season. And we look at how things gone. 31st Dakota, 9th at Sonoma, 18th in Chicago, 8th in this very race here last year. And he had an even better car before that, had a run-in with Kyle Larson. Christopher Bell, Wormser, where are we going with this guy?
You want to know what my notes say? My notes say Chris Bell is dead to me, period. Those are my notes.
This is the week to bet him. This is the week, Stay Green family. If Chris isn't having any exposure on his racing card, the rest of us will bet him, and we can dance on his grave. Chris is there.
Right before every race, I make a pick, and I picked Chris Bell the last couple of weeks, and he's been terrible. Like, he hasn't even been a threat for a top 3. Like, I mean, could you stop practicing so damn good, Chris Bell? Because I am so confident that Chris Bell has the best car going into every race, and he just lets me down week in and week out. So, I mean, even Wobb's so funny. He's like, don't make me do this. It's
Wobb is saying what the rest of us are thinking every week when it comes to Chris Bell.
So, here's my take. He was really good here last year, and you can't ignore that. And also, the cool thing about Chris Bell's poor finish is that we're starting to see his price actually, raise up a little bit. You weren't able to get Chris Bell at 14-1 at all earlier in the season. It didn't matter the track. He was kind of hovering between that 8 to 10-1 range. So now you're starting to get paid out. Unfortunately, even when he has a fast car, he makes a mistake. And it's so hard to pass these days that if you make a mistake, even if it's, right around halfway, it's really hard to recover fully. So you're getting a nice payout on Chris Bell. Again, I'll probably bet him. He'll probably be my pick. But we haven't, I don't think that, you're beating the market at this point with Chris Bell at 14-1. Remember, if Chase Elliott or Kyle Larson go out there, let's say they run 1-2 in practice and then they qualify 1-2, you're going to see a massive shift in this market, and it's going to provide a lot of value on a lot of other drivers. And I think that Chris Bell could be one of those guys that certainly has the talent to win, but just refuses to do so and spite me and my professional career.
Is there any value in the driver of the Colleague Racing 16 car, and AJ Allmendinger? 2 chances to get himself into the playoffs. Current form ain't great by any stretch of the imagination. No finish better than 17th over his last 5 races. 6th at Sonoma, but his only top 10 finish on a road course this season would be that 6th place finish. When we look at track history, 3 of his last 4 trips here were all top 10s. Did win Watkins Glen in the Cup Series back in 2014. What's most impressive, though, is the way he has qualified to give him a puncher's chance each and every time they come to upstate New York. Hasn't started outside the top 10 here since 2009. That's a string of 9 straight starts,
really?
all inside the top 10. So maybe getting to that final round of qualifying will be the kind of jump start, kick start, whatever we want to call it, to get him rolling in the right direction. But AJ Allmendinger, buy, sell, hold.
Well, let's de-peel the onion here on, or would you say unpeel?
An onion has layers, so it's
don't you just say
the layers
peel though?
of the onion. Yeah, you can
Wouldn't
say peel it. When was
you
the
said
last time you were in the
unpeel.
kitchen? Do you know how to cook? You have to
No.
peel the onion.
You guys can't hear my wife cooking in the background. That's what's going on in the background.
There we
right
go.
now.
These 7 female listeners we had listening now are going to report Worm for his sexist behavior here. So thank you, Worm, for being open-minded for all the
Hey,
young
you
ladies
just asked me if I
and
cook. I
diehard
said
female
no.
fans out there. They don't come for your good looks. It's a podcast.
Okay. So there's something different about Dinger this year. I always felt like he was a massive threat to win road courses, and for whatever reason, he hasn't been qualifying well. And he's so impatient. He's almost like Kyle Busch Jr. on road courses, where if he's not running in the top 5, it's like, okay, I have to get it all in one lap. And he puts himself in tough positions and enforces it kind of throughout the race. And he has trouble finishing them. So we were joking kind of before, okay, take him to win the race and then take his over finishing position. Because, his over finishing position is probably like 7.5 or 8. And then hope that he just doesn't finish in the top 8 unless he wins, right? So he's just kind of feast or famine. And I think he just tries to get too much out of an average race car, and he's put himself in too many compromised positions, and he's just not getting finishes. I can't get behind him right now. If he looks good, we can fire on him at 8-1. Like, he's a guy that I trust, but he just hasn't unloaded with that speed. And I don't know if I have no idea if that is the 16 car or if it's just Colleague in general, because we haven't seen outside of the Chicago road course. We haven't seen much from Justin Haley. And so it could just be Colleague as a program has kind of taken just a sidestep when everyone else has taken a step forward. But I just haven't seen that same speed out of that 16.
Yeah, I mean, look, he struggled a little bit, and you figure all it takes is one race to be able to kind of turn things around to make something happen for AJ Allmendinger. But right now, the way he's being priced in the market, just not enough to try and get me to create exposure from a pre-week standpoint until we see a little bit more consistency there. Denny Hamlin, driver of the 11 car, no idea what his paint scheme will be this weekend, so I'm not going to say it's going to be the Toyota FedEx 11 Camry or whatever the hell it is. Maybe it's Mavis, maybe it's Sport.
They don't sponsor us, right?
No, yeah, we don't know. They can sponsor us if they want. I mean, look, everyone knows that FedEx and the role they play in the gambling community. If you need more, if you need me to expand further on that, I'm not going to.
That actually is really funny.
Denny, I mean, look, Denny Hamlin's odds, though, he's a driver that's been on the move, and we've seen the biggest change. 30-1 you could have found on Denny earlier in the week. 16, pretty much the consensus now. And when we look at his current form, he never had the pace or speed last week. And just was really an afterthought. The fact that he said finishing inside the top 20, racing side by side with Brad Kay, was a win for him was pretty surprising, to say the least. The run ended a string of 4 straight races inside the top 7. But the reason that you're seeing Denny's odds come crashing down is because he's actually had a good amount of success here at Watkins Glen. Came home 20th last year when the Toyotas were off the pace, similar to what we talked about for Martin Truex Jr. But before that, his previous 5 years, I mean, this was one of his best road courses. 5th in 2021, 3rd in 2019, 13th in 2018, 4th in 2017, and he won the race back in 2016. I have a feeling I know where you're going, Worm, but as the number moved too much, that there's actually value still on Denny Hamlin.
Yeah, the number has moved a lot from that 30. I would say if you can find him at 20, I still absolutely like that. I love Denny this week. Poor qualifying last week. He unloaded like a donkey. Who knows if they were trying something or not, but this was a far cry from the guy we had seen the last couple of road course races, especially because he had pulled it both times. So he was trash all weekend, and almost so bad to the point where I was afraid to fade him in matchups. He was just so bad that it's like, well, they're going to wholesale change this thing, and maybe or they're going to have to take an alternate strategy. And they chose the alternate strategy. They didn't get the caution, and they weren't able to kind of salvage even a decent finish. He was just saying that you were lucky to even see me on TV. I was just racing Brad Keselowski within 5 car lengths.
He got a stage point. Look, he went out there and he was able to win stage 2. So it wasn't a completely lost day for him.
Yep. I think Denny could be good. I would not be shocked if Denny went out there and pulled it. I don't know what his price is to win that. If you have like 10-1, I would say go ahead and maybe nibble there. But the 16-1 price a little bit low on the low end for me from an outright perspective. I do like a 20-1 or above, just because I do think that the Toyotas are going to be fast this week. And if Truex is fast, I certainly think that Denny will be fast, along with some potential other guys that run for Toyota.
One final driver that we'll call in the value tier, that would be Chris Buescher. He, the winner of back-to-back races, didn't have the same kind of finish last week in Indy that I think a lot of people anticipated given his momentum. But at the same time, it would be complete disrespect if we sold his performance short, because the 11th place finish made for 9 straight top 11s and 5th most points scored on road courses this season. So he has really shown that road course racing is a discipline that he's extremely comfortable in. When we look at his overall body of work, 8th, 4th, 10th, and 11th on the road courses. And last year did finish inside the top 10 at Watkins Glen. Chris Buescher, 18-1. What are your thoughts, my friend?
I said last week incorrectly that Michael McDowell and Chris Buescher are very predictable on road courses. They're going to qualify anywhere from 8th to 12th, and they're going to run between 4th and 9th. Well, I got them both wrong, because McDowell goes out there and wins the race, and then Buescher finishes 11th. I thought he kind of finished in the top 10, but I still think that they're very similar drivers. I think that both of them can be a little bit more aggressive, either with setups, with strategy, or just driving, because they're both locked into the playoffs, especially Michael McDowell. It'll be interesting to see how he kind of approaches this week, but I think that they're going to be very similar. I don't like the 18-1 price, because I think that'll still be widely available even if he unloads really fast in practice. So I'm going to go ahead and hold off on the 18-1, but I certainly like him. These top 10 markets are trash this week, so obviously you can't go there. But if you find him in matchups against a guy that you don't feel is comfortable or you don't think is as comfortable on road courses, then absolutely go ahead and take a shot with Buescher. He's just ultra consistent, and I really like that I just like a consistency out of a guy on a road course, and him and McDowell have kind of been that staple this year.
Well, when we talk about consistency, maybe there's a little bit of value and wiggle room to be found in this quartet of long shots that I'll throw out there. And of course, if I leave somebody off, by all means, make sure you throw his hat into the ring accordingly. William Byron, Ty Gibbs, Austin Cindric, and your favorite driver of all, Alex the Showman Bowman. When we look at William Byron, current form, 5 straight races, now finishing 14th or worse. We talked about the fact that his weekend last week in Indianapolis was doomed even before that car hit the track for an actual lap. When you look at how he's done here as a driver with HMS, it's been feast or famine. 2 top 10s, 2 finishes outside the top 20. Ty Gibbs pulling double duty this weekend, going to drive the 19 in the Xfinity Series, 49 points shy of the cut line, needs to win and get in, but he has shown a sign of maturity and that he's figuring things out a little bit. Austin Cindric, an anticlimactic effort last weekend, although he did take a good amount of money in his head-to-head matchup with Denny Hamlin, so bettors that laid the $1.25, $1.30 were rewarded there with about 30 to 40 cents of closing line value. 6th Dakota, 25th at Sonoma, 15th at Indy. As far as his track history, came home 13th here last year in the next-gen car, did win the Xfinity race in 2019 and finished 3rd in 2021. Alex Bowman, underrated as a road course racer, 5th at Indy, 3rd at COTA. Maybe starting to figure things out, as that was his best finish since returning with that back injury issue. Those 4 drivers, you can hit on all of them. You can hit on one of them. The floor is yours.
Willie B last year going into this race, I don't know if you remember this or not, he was my pick to win. And it was kind of during the pre-race poll when I just saw he was going to go to the rear. And I was like, throw all my pieces of paper in the air. Well, that's gone.
He'll probably finish better than Christopher Bell.
Yeah, he probably one-spotted him. I like Byron this week. If we kind of hold true to the fact that maybe Hendrick isn't showing their hand, if they do decide to show it, or they just have a ton of speed, I wouldn't be shocked to see, listen, the 5 and the 9 are going to be pretty fast. I can't imagine that the 24 and the 48 are going to be that far behind. I think William Byron at 25-1, it's almost like if you get him at 25-1 almost anywhere, you have to pull the trigger. I don't hate William Byron right now at that 25-1 price. I haven't nibbled it myself, but might. But kind of just going right into Alex Bowman. Alex has shown actually a lot of speed, obviously last week, but then at Michigan he was good. Richmond, he was average. Pocono, he was really fast. I think he was kind of running in the top 3 there when I can't remember who he got into or almost got into. Oh, no, Denny Hamlin almost got into him and he ended up spinning out, but he was running in 3rd right there. So I think that this 48 team is trending the right direction, but they're going to have to get to victory lane. Because of that, I do like his outright price more than I like him in matchups, just because I think they're going to have to be super aggressive. They're going to do something that the leaders don't do. And, like we saw last week with Brody Kostecki, we saw someone that did not need tires, but with 11 or so laps to go, decided to pit just in case there's a caution, because then they stay out and they have the freshest tires. So I think when looking at guys like Alex Bowman or Daniel Suarez, be careful betting them in the matchup markets, because they're going to have to win the race. They're going to be desperate, and that might include some luck. If they're running in that 3rd or 4th spot, they might sacrifice that track position in order to do something different to somehow get to the lead. But I do like Bowman. His price he was like 60-1 week in and week out the last couple weeks. Now he's 30-1. So books are catching on a little bit. You don't have to put very much down to get paid there. Austin Cindric, just not the same guy. And when it comes to this track, it's not as technical. It's a higher speed track. I think Austin Cindric excels at these more technical tracks. That's why I think you're seeing higher prices on him. He's typically a guy I like to bet on in road courses, but he's not qualifying well this year when at these particular tracks. So I'm staying away there. Ty Gibbs, I thought he was better than Chase Elliott last week. Yep, I said it. He was incredible. He was incredible in the Xfinity race. I know that's a completely different car, but it's one thing to go out there and win an Xfinity race. It's another thing to kick the shit out of everybody in an Xfinity race. I mean, he was so fast, and he had a fast car. If you listen to the broadcast during the Xfinity race, Jeff Burton was saying that he had potentially a car to win the race the following day. And I agreed. When you went back and looked at practice, he was super fast. I think he'll be fast again this week. I think that he's actually better at this track than he was last week. It's just a matter of, do they unload fast? If they can unload fast and Ty can kind of qualify in that top 7, I think it'll be really interesting to see if he can pass some of these faster cars and maybe get up there and mix it up and potentially make his way into the playoffs, which I think would be great. And Ty Gibbs, not a big fan of this kid. He wrecked his teammate last year. I can't forget about that. I'm not a big fan, but if with the race on the line, I think he'd be willing to do almost anything to get that win. And I enjoy having my money on drivers that are willing to do that. We've been critical of Kyle Larson for not doing that. We've praised Denny Hamlin for actually being aggressive and cashing us tickets. I think Ty Gibbs will be a ticket casher if we put him in the right spot to do it.
Be very interesting to see what lengths he's willing to go to should he have an opportunity to get into the playoffs for the first time in his very short NASCAR career. You can follow Chris on X at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, we have not had a hot hand when it comes to best bets. We're always transparent with our audience when it comes down to all of it. Still working from a position of strength, riding that momentum of a 7-1 ticket we crashed way back when. Split last week with our best bets on the podcast. Michael McDowell, a rocking chair top 10 winner. Denny Hamlin, not quite able to get there. And Ty Gibbs, the tipping point, couldn't quite get it done for us in that particular spot. But when you're looking at the best bet opportunities that exist this week, where are we going, kind sir?
We're sticking with my boy Tyrone Gibbs, the top 10.
Shocking.
Well,
Shocking.
I like
the day you brought to the dance.
I know. I like these top 10 markets, but man, whatever happened this week, it's like they just quit. And his price has moved a little bit, but I certainly still like Ty Gibbs minus 120. You can shop that around. I was just kind of briefly looking right before the pod started, and it took a little bit of movement. I think he was just a little over even money. Now he's just a shade under. You got to pay $1.20, but I think this kid's going to qualify in the top 10. I think he's going to stay there all day long.
That's the full explanation for Tyrone Gibbs, to try and get Tyrone Tyson. What actually is his real name?
I don't know.
These are the kind of things I expect you to know. You're the professional NASCAR guy around here. So if you can't know a driver's full name that we're actually betting on before you give it out.
Hey, I don't make the medium bucks to know the names of the drivers. I make the medium bucks to pick the winners. And so far we've been splitting a lot lately. So I'd like to go ahead and just stay with Ty Gibbs minus 120. I like it. Minus 125 is probably the most expensive price I'd be willing to pay. I can't trust the kid. He's still a child. But I think he's gonna have a fast race car, and I can't get over him wrecking his teammate. I'm sorry.
I'm sure Brandon Jones can't get over it either, because Brandon Jones hasn't really had a race-winning car since then. Although he did.
No, that was the last time he had a chance at winning.
Yeah, poor guy.
Yep. So I like Ty Gibbs -120 top 10.
All right, my friend. Anything else that you'd like to share with our loyal Stay Green listeners before we close up shop here? And this time next week, we'll have one race left to go, the infamous wild card at Daytona, to figure out who the 16 drivers will be punching their ticket towards the postseason. We are still aggressively efforting to get a big name in NASCAR to join our fold next week. Hopefully we have a guest lined up, because for me, it means I get to talk to Chris a lot less, and it makes this podcast that much more enjoyable, as I'm sure it does for all of you, our loyal listeners.
All right. Well, I got to go unpeel some onions, whatever the hell that means.
Why don't you go make yourself useful for a change? For the first time ever in your life, you're able to lend some value outside that NASCAR arena. For Chris Wormy, I'm Todd Furman. Again, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And with a Ty Gibbs top 10 ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon from the Finger Lakes in upstate New York, hopefully we'll see you at the window.